Thank you all, and thank you especially to Pankaj. I'm struck, Pankaj, by the freshness of your remarks. You could have come with something prepared back in London, and instead what you just said seemed to really come out of yesterday's conversations, and it's really striking to feel the vitality of what's going on in this room through your remarks. It's an honor to be here with two writers who, among their other talents, are master storytellers, both in fiction and nonfiction. And as we engage with the question of where transcendence is found in the literature of our time and of the recent past, I think I'll begin by asking Javier to tell a story.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Pankaj and Tom, thank you very much for inviting me to be here. First of all, I have to excuse myself because my English is really poor. In fact, I speak it in Spanish. There was this philosopher, Ortega y Gasset, the Spanish philosopher, who said that great, illustrious men don't speak foreign languages in public. And I agree with him. Because, great illustrious men cannot risk to be ridiculous. But as far as I'm not a great man, no problem. That's why I speak so many languages. Anyway, the title of this event is The Diminished Dialogue Between Faith and Literature. And in my personal case, maybe the title should be The Increased Dialogue Between Faith and Literature. At least, well, first of all, because my last book deals with Pope Francis, religion, this strange institution that has lasted for 2,000 years called the Catholic Church, etc. But also because my literary vocation is linked, strongly linked to faith, or to be more precise, to the loss of faith. And that's why I have to begin telling a story. I feel obliged to tell this story so that you know where I speak from. In fact, this story I told for the first time here in Rome, in a very wonderful situation with a dialogue with Cardinal Ravasi, who was the Minister of Culture of the Vatican. It was a dialogue like this between faith, about faith and literature. And also I tell it at the beginning of the book on the Pope. The story is like this. What I said is that my literary vocation is the result of two uprootings. The first one is let's say, a cultural or geographic uprooting, in the sense that I was born in a tiny town in the south of Spain, close to the Portuguese border. And, tiny town, very protected. My big family, we were rich in this tiny town. When we got out, we were poor. But anyway, so my family, when I was 4, emigrated to, like so many people in Spain at that time, to the north, rich, to get a job and a life. And for me, that was a shock, in fact. A shock because I was out of my place, because I felt a sense of, like being an orphan, that was not my place, really. Different culture, different language, different everything. And I'm sure that if I would stayed in that tiny town where I was born, I would have been a writer. I remember always Cesare Pavese, the great Italian writer, wrote in his extraordinary diary, literature is a defense against the offenses of life. And that's a wonderful thing. I think that was my first offense in life. We all have so many. Okay, that was the first uprooting, and the other one is most important. I don't know if it's most important, but today is more important. I would say it's not spiritual. I'm not sure about this word. Anyway, a religious uprooting. In the sense, the story is like this. I was 14 years old, and I went back to this tiny town, as every summer we did. And well, it happened one of these things that happened when you are 14. I fall in love crazily, but really crazily. It was the first time. So the summer ended, and I went back to my town, to the 1,000 kilometers from that place, and I was really desperate. I wanted to hang myself from the cathedral, or something like, to kill myself, really. So the situation was really serious, and to solve it, I went to look for I went to the most serious book I found at home, which happened to be a book called San Manuel Bueno Mártir, very well known in the Spanish-speaking world. I'm sure it's translated into English and to Italian, sure. It's by a big guy in Spanish-speaking culture called Miguel de Unamuno, philosopher, essayist, novelist, poet, etc. And it's a sort of, we're in Italy, it's sort of mixture of Papini and Pirandello, something like that. Anyway, this book is about, the title would be in English like Saint Manuel, the Good and the Martyr, right? Something like that. So the book is about a priest that in a tiny town loses his faith, but keeps on preaching to his parishioners because he thinks that without faith, they will be lost. These humble people, they will be lost. Well, I read this book, and I read all Unamuno's work during that year, and that was a shock. This book was a real shock. Everything changed. Believe me, up till that moment, I was a wonderful boy. I was a very good student, very good at sports. I was a Catholic, very, very Catholic. Well, Spain is a Catholic, especially was a Catholic country at that time. Franco was still alive, and Catholicism was the essence of the dictatorship. My family was Catholic. My education was Catholic. I went to a Catholic school. Anyway, but at that moment, I lost my faith. And I began to smoke cigarettes and drink beer, and I entered in a sort of moral turmoil from which I've never escaped. Anyway, I'm joking, but I'm not joking at the same time, because everything changed. Up till that moment, I was a reader, but a different kind of reader. I was reading just for pleasure, for fun, which is the most important thing, of course, in literature. But I read, adventure novels, history books, etc. From that moment on, everything changed. I went to literature in search of meaning, in search of knowledge. That's literature. In fact, that's the best way to read, right? It's like sex, right? Sex is pleasure, first of all, and then knowledge. So literature is the same. That's why when I find somebody that tells me that he doesn't like literature, I just give him my condolences. It's like somebody that doesn't like sex. Anyway, yes, that was the big change for me, a very important change, because from that moment on, I read in a different way, and I began to imagine myself as a writer, which was very strange because my family, no writer in my family, no writer around. So, in a sense, now I understand that, what I was looking for in literature was the certainties, the security, the answers I had when I was a young boy in religion. And that's what I looked for in literature. And of course, that was a mistake, because literature, as far as I understand it, in my view, doesn't give you certainties, it gives you more restlessness, it gives you more questions than answers. But when I discovered it, it was too late. And finally, Pankaj yesterday was saying that in our time, or well, I would say from the 19th century, lots of people changed religion for literature. Literature became a sort of religion. Well, you have one of these guys here. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Zaidi, I think that you're the first great writer that I've been able to follow from the beginning of your career, to see you come onto the scene with a strong novel and complicate things and deepen them and exfoliate into nonfiction and other kinds of storytelling, all the while remaining, as you characterized yourself yesterday, a comic novelist. And to see your interest in transcendence, that's a further development, at least as far as I'm concerned, and one that we're really fortunate to have. This space is the occasion for you to develop it for us a bit further. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to tell a story too. I'm a little nervous, and I think it might be the opposite story. But I've made some notes actually, because normally I said I wasn't going to, but in this case I think I need to have a basic guide. This morning actually I opened the internet like that, and there was an extraordinary painting by Tracy Emin of the Passion. It's in the Royal Academy, and it has rave reviews, but the review was, what could be more shocking than an artist like Tracy Emin painting a sincere picture of the Passion? But it is an extraordinary painting, and you should go have a look. Anyway, so I'm going to try and risk that same sincerity. So I was going to start with thinking about when I was a kind of baby writer, maybe even before I wrote White Teeth. I remember reading these lines of Foster Wallace. There's nothing particularly deep about them. In fact, you could probably put them on a tote bag, but it was something like, if you worship money, you will always feel poor. If you worship beauty, you will always feel ugly. If you worship power, you will always feel weak. And I remember reading it and thinking, if you worship God, what will you always feel? And I realized I didn't really have an answer to that. If you worship God, what will you always feel? When I was writing White Teeth, the comedy of that book in my mind was that it was about some very religious people, Muslims and Jehovah's Witnesses, and another third type of very religious person, which was liberals, rationalist liberals. And that was the comedy of it, that the third party didn't think they had a faith. They thought they were just being extremely rational about life. But of course, it was a philosophical system that dominated their lives and through which they did everything. And that's what interested me, because I grew up in, I think what you would call radical atheism, to the point that once when I was about 9, a very sweet English boy, I think he had a crush on me, brought me a Bible for my birthday, and my mother took it and just threw it out the window in front of his face to this poor 9-year-old boy. So that was the kind of context I grew up in, because she had grown up in this, extremely oppressive church, the Witnesses, which was kind of life-destroying for her and all of her family. So that was the context I grew up in, but I was, from the beginning, interested in religion as philosophical systems. I guess because I grew up amongst Hindus, Muslims, 2 different kinds of Christians, and a kind of syncretic worship that many Jamaicans have left over from West African experience. That's what I grew up in, and I was always envious. I was fascinated, like going around my friend's house, seeing people break fast, seeing people sit Seder, and I was always interested. So as I started writing these novels, there's White Teeth, and then Autograph Man is obviously about Judaism and Buddhism, 2 things I was very interested in at the time. And then On Beauty, which is really about the worship of art. N.W., which for me is an Anglican novel. Swing Time, which is, again, about that kind of syncretic African idea. And The Fraud, which is, to me, a Catholic novel. But I guess what I realized over 25 years of writing these books is that if it was a way of learning to be good, it was a very slow process. So each novel, you learn like one thing. And I was like, this is a very laborious way of becoming even a slightly better person. And then at NYU, I guess, what struck me is that I would very often meet, truly evil moral philosophers, or deeply selfish poets, or, brutal novelists. I include myself there because I'm also an asshole. And I thought, this doesn't work. Like this thing that I do, I mean, I love doing it, but it's clearly not a very efficient system, because look at all these people and look at me. So when I moved back to London, you know, I'm literally in the parish I was born in. I'm on the street that I was born in, though I'm, you know, in the nice house instead of in the estate across the road. And then again, I was surrounded by Jews and Muslims and Hindus and Anglicans and Catholics. And what I thought was, you know, like the Jews, I don't have any interest in heaven or hell. I have no metaphysical concerns. And like the Muslims, I believe in this submission or surrender, particularly to contingency. And like the Anglicans and Catholics, I find the story of Christ kind of endlessly interesting and inspiring. And also like the Hindus, I seem to have many gods. So I was like, okay. So then you know, there's a kind of local church in my area, and it's the one I used to dance in when I was a kid, so I guess it appears in Swing Time. And long ago, it was it's a very big 19th century church, and half of it was sold off to flats in about 1987. So now what's left is, I guess, just a tiny corner of this church. And I found myself going one day, and, you know, I walked in very nervous, and the congregation is about, I would say at most, on a good day, it's 12 people. Half of those people are heroin addicts. And the first day I walked in, the vicar hadn't come. Sometimes the vicar just doesn't come. And one of the congregations is a homeless man was giving a eulogy to his dog that had just died. And there was a big picture of the dog. And we all sat and celebrated his dog who had recently died. And I thought, what am I doing here? This is crazy. And I think I had an alibi in my mind. It's kind of Iris Murdoch alibi, which I do subscribe to, that to me, the idea of the good, the idea that the good exists as a concept universally and in every culture, no matter what the particularities of that is God. And that is what interests me. But it was still an alibi. Like, I'm still in an Anglican church worshipping a Alsatian that had recently died. But then the extension of this church is that every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we have a larder. And so you're feeding people in the community. And the one thing I really noticed about that is that it re-enchants the neighborhood. So my neighbors, a lot of them, my neighborhood is gentrified very quickly and enormously. And I think when they walk through the neighborhood, it is a place of fear for them sometimes. But when I walk through the neighborhood, I'm like, that's not a meth head, that's Dave. Because I know Dave now, because Dave comes and eats at the larder. So the whole neighborhood becomes this kind of, it's still my neighborhood, but I see it differently. I don't just see the middle-class mums with the chairs or my writer friend across the park. I see it like every layer of it, because I know these people now. And I guess that thing about how do you want to be connected in the world? Like, how do you want to be in communion with people? And also the simple, I was saying to Paul yesterday, that Philip Larkin point about being in a place where for hundreds of thousands of years, people have gathered for this purpose, just to be quiet, just to be in communion, just to be with each other. I suddenly found that not a contemptible idea. And I did notice, you know, I was talking to Nazreen yesterday about hearing the Quran, listening to the Quran. It's the same with me. The language of Anglicanism is meaningful to me. I find it in my head. The whole conception of prayer has interested me more and more. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not in any way an effective, good, or faithful Anglican, but I was so interested in the idea that this space provides something that, at least in contemporary capitalism, is not available anywhere else, as far as I can see. End of remarks.
What am I doing here? You said. You know, that put to mind Bruce Chatwin. That's the title of one of his posthumous works. And what Chatwin was doing, he wound up at Mount Athos and in the Greek Orthodox Church. It also puts in mind Flannery O'Connor, what she described, and she may have been paraphrasing another thinker, the mystery of our position on earth. What am I doing here? So Zaidi, the way you've explained it, you're on the move. Newman said, to live is to change, to be perfect is to change often. How about you, Javier? You went to Mongolia with Pope Francis. Have you moved from Sono Ateo, I am an atheist, which begins the new book? Where are you now? Are you on the move, or are you in a fixed position in terms of religion?
If you are asking me if I went back to my previous faith, I converted to Catholic Christianity again. My answers are two. The first answer is given by a character in the book, who is the Lorenzo Fazzini, who is the director of the Vatican Publishing Company, who is a character in the book. We are like Don Quixote and Sancho Panza in the book. Nobody knows who is Don Quixote and who is Sancho Panza. But he tells me all the time in the book, he works in the Vatican, he tells me, if you convert to Catholicism, don't tell it, because you are not going to sell a copy of your book. But then 4 years after that, you can write a book on your conversion, and you give it to me, and then I'm going to sell 4 million copies for you. That's my first answer. The second answer, so if I would have converted, I wouldn't tell. The second answer is that no, this book changed for me everything. My vision of the church, my vision of, I love that Zaidi has also put the debate in personal terms, because I think it's a personal thing. Your experience is absolutely different from my experience, because your context was completely different from my context.
Right.
You cannot imagine what it was to be a boy in a dictatorship, right, where Catholicism is everything, and is, sorry to say that, but it's maybe the worst Catholicism in the world.
There's some competition for that role. But yes.
No, it's terrible. It's all defects, all vices of Catholicism were there.
Yeah.
Clericalism, Constantinism, meaning power and church at the same time. So in my case, was also a form of rebellion against that. Like in your case,
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
so it's very important to say that in personal terms, because it's okay. Then the other answer to your question is, faith is a really strange thing in my experience. In many places in the book, I talk to people like Father Spadaro, for instance, which is a character in the book, and to many people about faith. And it is a very strange thing. For instance, there is a moment in which I talk to Cardinal Tolentino, great guy, wonderful guy, great poet. My friends in Portugal say that he's the best poet in Portuguese. Anyway, we talk about that, and I told him, Cardinal, don't you think that faith is like a poetical intuition? So meaning the vision of something in there that only you see, right? And that around you nobody sees but you. And the transmission of that in a very sophisticated language. That's the poetical intuition. So is it like that? And he tells me, yes, it's exactly like that. It's a sort of poetical intuition, intuition of a meaning. And then I talked to Pope Francis, and I told him, hey, we with Cardinal Tolentino agreed on the fact that it's a sort of poetical intuition, an intuition. And he says to me, no, it's a gift. If it's a translation, don is a gift, Juan Gabriel, gift. It's a gift. It's a gift. It's a gift. And I'm not sure that both things are contradictory. I think that's complementary, if not are the same thing. But in any case, the point is that faith is not something that voluntary. It's not out of the will. I've came. One of the things in this book, I admired my mom, who is in fact the main character in the book, the secret protagonist in the book. She was a real Catholic. She was a real believer, but real. And I admired this woman. He had a force. He has security. He had a I call it superpower. I couldn't do the things I've seen her doing. And the same with what I would call the heroes of this book, which are the missioners. I mean, I've been with them in Mongolia and other places, but especially in Mongolia. And these kind of guys, you can be an atheist, you could be an agnostic, you could be a believer, but you cannot admire these kind of people because they have, some things that you don't have. They have the security, etc., etc. So I, before that book, and especially after this book, I came to admire these people and envy them.
Yeah, envy.
I thought, wow, that would be wonderful to have this superpower. But I lost it. That's what I say, mysterious. I lost it. Even if I wanted to go back, I don't know how to do it. It's like poetry. You cannot say, I need to write a poem, so I'm going to have a poetical intuition. No, you have it or you don't have it. So I'm still there.
I think the difference maybe with Anglicanism is that you have an alibi. Like the person least likely to believe in God in any Anglican church is the vicar. It's a place of so little faith that it's almost comical, and of so little power, I guess. Every Anglican church in England has about 4 people in it. So maybe I just have a sympathy for things that are dead or almost over. But I guess what interests me in all this anyway is that if I can write, I don't know how many novels that is now, with this submerged interest in faith, I don't think I'm the only one. I think this is probably something that you'll find in a lot of art. If you looked more closely and stopped assuming maybe that anyone who isn't white, the subject of a novel is identity. Maybe there are other subjects to the novel if you look a little bit more closely and consider it more deeply. And I certainly see in many other contemporary writers, especially the most popular, I think the reason for them mass popularity is because even if they are unconscious of it, they're speaking of something which resonates quite deeply with people. I spoke about Sally Rooney as an example, but I was so struck by A Beautiful World, Where Are You? In fact, even the title is about a kind of desperate desire for re-enchantment. But each chapter in that book, if you think about something other than the sex in it for 5 seconds, which no reviewer ever seems to manage to do, but at the end of each chapter is this literally transcendent image. Sometimes it's just the sky, sometimes it's the sun, sometimes it's a leaf. It's just silence and a moment of concentrated looking. And I really do think that all those millions of readers, they might not be aware of it, but they want a space where they might just be able to look at something without analyzing it, without arguing about it, without monetizing it, but just to consider it. I was so struck by the transcendent in those books, and also that I couldn't find a reviewer who seemed to notice it. So it's funny with a lot of this, and I guess Karl Ove Knausgaard is another, he's an existentialist, but there is a great deal of nature worship in those books. But again, the reviews are, oh, how boring, he just talks about beer. Or, maybe we need better literary critics who have more insight into what's going on at the line level and at the philosophical level. Yeah.
Did you ever get to discuss that with Sally Rooney, this lurking transcendence or submerged?
We talk a lot on email. She's a very brilliant and incredibly fierce intellect, and we've spoken about. I think I don't want to speak for Sally, but I know she has an interest in what she sees as the Marxist aspect of the Gospels and of Christ's life itself. To read the Gospels is to be really, challenged by the idea of someone who says, even your cloak you have to give up. Like, most of us are not willing to give up, 20% of our taxes, never mind also my cloak. So I think she's interested in the political aspect of the Gospels, and it can be a bit exhausting sometimes to not have any kind of intellectual conversation which includes philosophies that have, as Javier says, lasted thousands of years and also dominate the everyday existence of billions of people, billions of Muslims, Hindus, Jews, Christians, who I often, when I'm at these kind of writer things, hear dismissed in a single line, as if their experience is nothing. And to me, it isn't nothing. They're living, that's life. And my liberal faith in the novel, which has lasted my whole life, I consider to be a faith. It's a faith. I lived by it. I believed in Tolstoy. I believed in Toni Morrison. I still live by the books that I've read, but I recognize it to be a faith, like any other.
Right now, you've suggested just that this conversation is going on among writers and among ordinary people, but that the critical intelligentsia maybe is missing it. But there's plenty of writers in the room who are probably already engaged in this conversation. So let's go to questions. Looks like Father Spadara has a question.
Thank you for all what you shared. Meanwhile, I was listening. It came to my mind an expression written by Coleridge. He was talking about the way faith. He said he defined it as a willing suspension of disbelief. And I think we need faith for enjoying literature, poetry, even movies. You cannot go to the movie theater saying, I'm going to watch a couple of fake news. No? So you cannot go to watch a movie, Taxi Driver, by Scorsese saying, no, this is just fake. I don't have faith in what is I'm going to watch. So you need faith. But at the same time, I was struck by the fact that he said a willing suspension of disbelief. So he underlined the human side. So you want to have faith, but at the same time, faith is a gift, as Javier said, as Pope Francis said. So there is a kind of dialogue between our will and the grace, something that has not to do with our will. I think this tension is very poetical. It's a big tension. What do you think? I mean, this is my opinion.
I think the Scorsese analogy is interesting because I would say I need faith to go to watch Goodfellas, to believe in the scenario, but I don't at the same time give up my critical ability to think, how does Hollywood work? Where does the money come from? How do these films function? Those two things happen to me simultaneously. So I'm not a Catholic, and I'm not an institutionalized person in that. To me, the church is a work made by human hands. And so this is to be critiqued at all times. So questions of faith that sentimentalize or romanticize the gift of faith as if in that moment all else disappears, I can't, for me, that's not possible. So, but I do understand what you mean by, like when I'm writing novels, I'm absolutely aware of, though all novelists in the room will know that feeling of doubt, constant doubt. Is it any good? Am I any good? What's the point of this? The fact that you keep on writing them is in itself proof of a strange faith in what you're doing. A lot of people never have that, and I notice what I would call most natural novelists. And I should say that natural novelists aren't always good. Some of the most natural novelists are bad all the time. But I know them. When I meet them, I know them. I see them. And it is an act of faith in that case. They feel themselves to be writers all the way down, and nothing can distract from that belief. But I would just, like, speaking to Javier's experience, and I have so many friends profoundly damaged by churches, my own family, were broken by the church they were in every, and it was a disguise for the witnesses, all kinds of sexual abuse, child abuse within my own family. My mother ran from that in order to survive. So I'm absolutely aware of this bloody legacy. My only point is that all human legacies are bloody. So, yes, that's all.
Naomi?
Hi. I just find myself thinking about just the integration of belief and action, and Zaidi, when you're saying even the cloak, or just the way people talk about Francis and the way he walked the walk, you know, and personally sacrificed. And how, and just the weight of hypocrisy, right? And how, but not only when it comes to the church, in so many aspects of life, so that when somebody actually integrates their belief, you know, we talked about Greta yesterday, just
Yep.
the sort of the sailboat across the Atlantic, right? But how much of, like, I just would like to hear both of you speak about the power of any, I mean, you Zadie, you said you're writing about Simone Weil, like of these figures who try to integrate an ethical system in the way they navigate the world. Does that have to be linked to religion, or is it just the rarity of people who do that in any walk of life?
Javier, do you want?
I'm not. You're talking about ethics out of religion,
Just
right?
For you, I mean, when it comes to Francis, I mean, I feel like a big part of what people who came back to the church
Yeah.
had to do with the model of somebody who seemed to be the way he lived his life
Yeah.
was so integrated with the belief system, and there had been so much of the opposite of that.
Yeah. It's true. I think that. Well, he was even called the Pope of the Atheists, you know, because he had so many sympathies among us, people that don't believe, etc. And it's funny because, especially in countries like Spain or like other countries where Catholicism or Christianism has triumphed, Spain, Italy, etc., right, France. People said, "Wow," or journalists or people, normal people said, "Wow, a pope that talks about poor people." But come on, this is the gospel. Come on, this is Jesus Christ. What is
Literally,
strange?
It's your job. Yeah, it's the job.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah.
But the strange thing is that all popes didn't talk about that. Yeah. That's what is strange. So yeah, I can imagine that some people was attracted to church because of him, but he wasn't doing anything strange. He was doing exactly as Zadie said, his job, going back to the gospel, etc. And on the other side, you said many things, very interesting things about the political dimension of the Pope. One of the things I discovered writing this book is that it's over the. I mean, we think that he has more power than he has. I mean, the Pope has not real power, political power, not at all. Not at all. It was the old popes that had the power, have had armies, etc., etc., etc. And of course, the Pope he has the right, and I like that the Pope says, okay, finish with Gaza, with this terrible thing. I like that, and I liked him saying in the balcony of St. Peter's, "Stop," like this Pope, "stop all the wars." Wonderful, but how many wars have stopped? How many? Not one. But if Netanyahu tomorrow says or today says, "Stop this," stops. So he has no real power. It's important to say that we attribute journalists and people in general talk too much about politics when it comes to church. One of the things that for me was surprising was the fact that in newspapers and in general life, people, when it comes to the church and to the Pope, especially Francis, only talk about politics. So the religious discourse was completely, concealed, and nobody knows about, for instance, that Pope was Francis, and of course this Pope will be anti-clerical. It's possible to say that in English? Mm-hmm. Against clericalism. And when you say that, people are, what? The Pope against clericalism? And it is very important. So the religious discourse is completely concealed by the political discourse. And he has no power. Not at all. We can say that he had, and the new Pope has, a moral, lots of people here to him, and etc. And this is okay. He can be a moral leader. Well, moral leader. Well, yes, okay, but no more than that. No more than that. And it's very important to say that. And on the other side, I would like to say something, because, Zedi, I don't know, when we talk about faith, or Father Spadaro, for me, faith is not the same. I mean, faith in literature, I have faith in literature like you and like we novelists have faith in literature, and also the reader has faith in what he's reading, right? He's reading Don Quixote and he believes in a sense that Don Quixote is there. Okay. But this is not the same as religious faith, in my humble view. It's not the same. I mean, religious faith is something in Christian and also in Muslim. This is something different. When Flannery O'Connor says it's much more difficult to believe than not to believe, she's saying that.
Yeah.
To believe in a serious way, Father Spadaro, if I'm wrong, please tell me, but in a serious way, it's very difficult. It's, sorry, my book is about that. If you are Catholic, if you are a real Catholic, like my mom, you believe in things that are extraordinary.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, the resurrection of the flesh and the eternal life. And this is it's easy to believe in Don Quixote, but it is very difficult to believe in this. And this is, as you know very well, the core of Christianity. Without that, it's not me. It's not Pope Francis that says that. It's St. Paul who says that. Without that, there is no Christian. So for me, it's two different things. I mean,
yeah, to me, that is like the Kierkegaardian leap into absurdity. I don't claim in any way to be a good Anglican or a good Christian at all. And in response to Naomi's question, is it necessary to do good works? Clearly not. All you need is a philosophy strong enough, as Greta has shown, to commit yourself. I think when I think about someone like Simone Weil, I mean, at this moment, she would be not eating. She would be not eating alongside the people of Gaza, and she would be not eating until the point of death. There's no doubt about that. And that is what absolute faith requires. It's an absolute belief in the language of the gospel. They had that. I don't have anywhere near that. I don't think it's necessary, but all I say, I'm speaking personally, as someone who is weak and doesn't have anything like that kind of power or that kind of miraculous faith or that kind of gift, that to me, all the structures of thought that have guided my life, and the novel is an absolutely central one, I found as I got into my 40s just didn't function. They didn't work for me. And that this tiny, ancient, absurd set of strictures has actually improved me slightly. I'm not making any great claims, but it's in my mind. It's just like a sense of a boundary, and more than anything else, of being in communion with people, of understanding what it is they get on their knees for, even if I can't get on my knees in the same way.
I have a question related to writers specifically, and the search for circling of faith. So one thing I think all of us know as writers is there's something performative about writing. That when we write, we are putting on a performance, and we can discover truth in putting on a performance, but we are performing something. And I think sometimes when it comes to matters of faith, there's a fear that the performance that we might be putting on, in a sense, blinds us to what we might actually be feeling.
Right.
And so I'm curious from both of you, we've been talking a lot about writers and faith. But I think the other thing, of course, that we do, and Zedi began to talk about this as well, is that, of course, we are readers. And in the way that we read, some of what we're looking into, what we're investigating, what we're inquiring into, can find a form of expression. We can read differently as we're approaching questions of faith. And it's possible that reading differently can inform how we might choose to write. That it may not be coming at faith sort of head on, but it may be opening up possibilities to explore it in fiction. So I'm just very curious for both of you to hear about how you think of this sort of tension, in a sense, between the performative nature of being a writer and the very personal question of how we approach these notions of faith and how reading and writing might play.
I mean, I've never spoken about any of this out loud to anyone, so it's pretty weird to be saying it in Rome with some priests in attendance. It's for me, honestly, it's more about I've spent so long trying to suppress feelings that I have instinctively. So I'm always, since I was a child, I've always wanted to say thank you to someone who isn't around. I've always done that. But I've always felt ridiculous, like, oh, thank you. Or if, my child comes home safely, I'm like, oh, thank you. And I was like, who the hell am I, who am I talking to here? Or the experience of finding nature overwhelming, or I need to cover the ears of the priest, the experience of taking mushrooms over and over again and seeing this kind of transcendent breathing world where everything seems to be breathing and being a plain song to itself day and night. Like you can't keep on having those experiences and saying, oh, well, never mind about those mushrooms, never mind about the sunshine and the gratitude so I just tried to find a way to not be ashamed of those feelings, because I think they're very widespread in the world. These instincts of oneness and just again that Murdochian idea that the good persists as a concept. Greta Thunberg has a conception of the good, and whatever philosophical system she comes to it from, the fact that it exists is miraculous, and I think not covered by evolutionary theory, not entirely. And so that interests me, even if it was just, my brother married a woman whose family, a big Anglican family, North London, working class Anglican family. I went to a funeral, there were like 800 people there. And she adopted 4 children as well as the 3 she had. And one of the things one of her children said at the funeral, she said, as her mother was dying, she said, even if it isn't real, it just really, I loved it. I thought that was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. The metaphysical element hadn't bothered her. She had spent her life in commitment to something that had made her happier, wholer, and able to give to all these people. And I thought that is so far from anything I had ever considered, that it might be worth committing to an idea, even if, not in the hope of reward, but because it actually modified and improved your experience on earth. That's not a very Catholic concept, but it fascinated me.
Well, Pascal took a similar position, so.
But that's a wager, that's a bet on the future. The other end I don't care for, personally. Heaven is not for me. I'd be bored. Yeah.
Javier?
I'm not sure to understand the question.
I think that when we write, or when you and I write, I find that there's something of a performance underway, which when you are unsure of something, when you are looking for something and you want to hear, it's sometimes difficult to perform and hear at the same time. And so I'm curious, I was curious as to whether you felt this, and whether you felt that that perhaps the quest for faith, the search for faith, the approach of faith is something that maybe naturally happens through reading or encountering other people, through, in a sense, taking things in more than saying things as a writer. I'm sort of curious as to, it's a topic that I don't have very well formulated thoughts. I'm just wondering whether our mode of art, which is to put words into the word publicly, do you find that naturally works well with your own examination of these matters of faith, or do you find it sometimes works at cross purposes with that examination?
When I write, I'm looking forward. I'm looking for something. I don't know previously what I'm going to say, what I'm going to tell. That's why, all my books begin with a question, and the whole book is a quest for an answer. And the answer finally is that there is no answer. The answer is the quest itself, the question itself, the book itself. So in this sense, yes, there is a. I don't know. I'm not a writer that from the beginning knows what's going to happen in the end of the book. Never. The book, the writing is a sort of, yes, speleology in myself, in the world, till finally I arrived to a place where I was not supposed to arrive. And then I have to go back at the beginning and, but it's exactly like that. I never know where I go. I haven't a vague idea. This has to do, you say, with the quest for faith. The point is that I don't, as I said before, I don't believe that you can look for it. I cannot imagine myself saying, I'm going to do something to, get back to my faith because it interests me. Father Spadaros wants to say something. Please.
I'll be very brief, but this is a very crucial point. And thank you for sharing your experience on this. Because, for having faith, we mean two different things. So, having faith, believing, doesn't mean to believe in a database. So, it doesn't mean to believe in a system of ideas and contents. It means to be open, to feel yourself a sense of transcendence. So when you fall in love with a person, better to say, falling in love with a person doesn't mean that you believe that she or he was born in Florence and that time, and means that you trust that person, you feel touched by that person. This is having faith. It's not believing in the system, in the ideological system. That comes afterwards. But having faith, this is another meaning of the word having faith, to believe. But the first one is this kind of openness, the openness in being available to the other. And what you just said is very relevant to me because it's exactly my kind of openness to the other, the sense of transcendence. But we cannot identify faith with faith in something, in data, even if they are revealed. But this is the second meaning of the word. But the first one, in this sense, the poetic faith by Coleridge is very inspiring to me. But it's just a contribution of a dialogue. This is a crucial point. Thank you.
That's exactly my experience. I go in with all my theories and Kierkegaard and Iris Murdoch, but that, to Mohsin's point, is like writing a novel. And to me, writing novels, I do enjoy it. I also find a little bit nauseating sometimes, just all this talk and all these thoughts. And the kind of faith that interests me, I guess, is where there is silence and where you don't appear for a moment, and also where you are available, as you say, to the other. And even, this is maybe a weird thing to say, but even, we think of the image of washing somebody's feet or holding somebody's feet, which Pope Francis did. I really notice when I'm working in the larder that a lot of, my previous citizen self, you don't realize how much disgust you have for suffering, for poverty, for dirt, for the smell of homeless people is so strong. It's quite shocking. You have a theory that you are a socialist and you care, but when it's actually in front of you, it's quite a lot to deal with. I'm so interested in all those experiences that previously I'd completely avoided for the activity of writing novels. And I think you can spend your whole life writing novels. I have spent my whole life sitting at a desk writing. And to me, there are other experiences. And of course, there are people, activists, people who are in the world, even my mother is a social worker, they may not ever consider themselves people of faith, but to me, they are in the world making space for other people in a way that I think it's often quite hard for novelists to do. We're babyish, we don't have proper jobs, we spend a lot of time by ourselves. Narcissism is a continual threat, and, you know, you need to be in the world. I don't say, to Naomi's point, it has to be in a church or an institution that you have good reasons to abhor or object to. But just for me, it's ancient, it's there, it has served this purpose for a long time, and I'm not here to reinvent the wheel, I'm not that smart. So it's just somewhere I can have these feelings.
I would like to say something because I think that no, I didn't answer, if I'm not wrong, Noemi's question. I think that there is, of course, an ethics outside religion. I mean, that's for sure. I mean, good people, I mean, there's an ethic. You don't need to be religious to believe in fraternity, to believe in others. That's obvious, right? That's one thing. And then the other thing I want to say is that that's why the word spirituality, for me, it's kind of vague, because, and religion is quite clear, and faith is quite clear, but spirituality is kind of vague, because in fact, we deal with always, we writers deal all the time with spirituality, right? We are dealing with feelings, and this is spirituality. So it's too vague to mix with faith. Sorry, stop.
You two, Javier, Zadie, you've opened up a huge spaces of inwardness. I can't believe we're beginning the day at such a place of depth. Thank you.
Thank you very much.